your weekly program, Balahdan, a show with an accent for those without men. We all heard about the tsunami of sexual accusation, sexual assault, sexual harassment. The Me Too movement empowered thousands, hundreds of people, hundreds of women to come out and talking about their story and their sexual harassment, sexual assault that is done by a man of some sort, usually a powerful white man. And this issue now, it's a debate. Every celebrity comes from celebrity in Hollywood, media personnel, powerful media personnel, to politicians. And now it's coming really home, Al Franken and now Garrison Keillor and all of this here in Minnesota. So we have here somebody, Karen Monahan. She's a Me Too advocate. She's been advocate of women issue and social justice for a long time. So she's going to talk about her as she is a color woman herself, that she had an experience and we will connect it to what's going on. Welcome to Balahdan, Karen. Thank you so much. And I know this is very hard and for you, and that it takes a lot of courage for someone to come and talk about this. And this is your show. You can talk about it in and out in the frame that you want. But tell us, as a color woman, that you've been watching this and monitoring this, and tell us the roots of all of this and some of the issues that really been missing out in the debate and in the conversation.
First, thank you so much for having me and covering this very important topic that impacts all of us. And I think that we first have to really understand how this country was colonized. Think about imperialism, capitalism, and who made those laws and created that system, and at whose expense. And it's white males. And so you're leaving out indigenous communities, people of color, and women. And it's in every crevice of our society. And the compound effect, it's visible, but it's also not visible. And even for myself, I have unpacked racism far more than I have unpacked patriarchy and how it's impacted me. And I think we're all human and we all have cultural hypnosis to some extent on various issues. And I think if we can begin to recognize that that's just part of being human, is we're all socialized. When we realize that and accept that, maybe we can begin to listen from a more compassionate lens and listen to try to understand and find our common humanity. And I think what you see is hundreds of years of a system that's built on oppressing people. It's, we've had moments throughout our history where we've had movements, and we have made a lot of major change in this country when it comes to race and comes to women's rights. But there's a lot more that we have to do. And I think what you see is another wave of feminism and to continue to dismantle patriarchy. And there's a lot of intersectionality with race and patriarchy. And so I think different people come to this conversation and have their own experiences through different lenses. And I think it's really important that we begin to truly listen with an ear to try to understand. And I think once we begin doing that and realize that we all have our cultural hypnosis, that we can begin to have some conversations that have been needing to happen for a very long time, and begin to make the changes that we need to make.
Sexual harassment was the culture of rape. This has been going on. It's almost an industry now. And but once it got into this celebrity kind of flavor to it, and once it comes to the white woman, now we hear about it. But what was missing out of this, and you represent that color woman, more likely to be sexually harassed and assaulted than a white woman, but we didn't hear about it.
Right.
And then it started from Anita Hill 26 years ago. And look how they lynched her. And you know, she was by herself a Me Too movement. Now 26 later, now we hear this. So tell us how the race and ethnicity and power play the role of all of the narrative of sexual harassment and assault.
First, I want to honor her. I think many of us are here today and had the courage to put on our Facebook and our social media, Me Too, because we stand on her shoulders. And I think a lot of folks now realize that maybe they were on the wrong side of that piece of history. And that's important for us to learn from and not make that same mistake. When we talk about intersectionality around a lot of these issues, again, a system that was built on oppressing people of color, indigenous communities, and women. You see that indigenous women and women of color are extremely marginalized. And it's in our psyche. And we also carry internalized oppression. And oftentimes, because of that, we don't speak out. I mean, we've been conditioned that you're not going to be believed, you're going to be smeared, which is only re-traumatizing a person. And you just learn through survival to continue just to shove that trauma in. And what we're really talking about is collective trauma. Anytime you dehumanize another human being, it creates trauma. And trauma lives in your body. And it doesn't just go away, even though you don't deal with it. And you have a compound effect of trauma. We carry ancestral trauma. So think about race in that aspect too. We carry, trauma from our mother's womb, and then, our own lived experiences. So that compounded effect of trauma, it's there. And we're not made, our systems aren't made to carry that kind of trauma. And so oftentimes you see people, when you have that kind of trauma, it has to be released. And I think what we're seeing is a collective trauma that is beginning to be released. It's like a detox, right? Mm-hmm. And when you think about something being detoxed, when it gets to that place when you're like detoxing your body, it kind of gets like worse before it gets better and out of the system. And I think that is what we're seeing in our country on a lot of issues. An old order, of, patriarchy, racism, inequality around income inequality, environmental injustice, and the compound effect of all of that is bubbling up. And we're going through, I like to, refer to it as like a collective dark night of the soul. And it gets nasty. But in order for us to heal as human beings, as a society, as a world, and our planet, it's important that stuff does fester up and it comes out.
Sometimes we talk about an issue like sexual harassment, it's like an abstract thing, because it didn't happen to me. I kind of sympathize whatever I post Me Too on Facebook, and that's the extent of it. But for somebody who gone through all of this, what is the impact, the reality? This has consequences on people's life. And so you've been talking to people who gone through this experience, and you've been trying to organize a mechanism that you can help those people and be part of the healing. Can you talk a little bit about some of specific about some of the people you talk to and some of the impact, the
Yes.
reality of those people after this have changed?
Yes. So as I said, Me Too survivor. And I haven't shared all of my experiences, and for these exact reasons. You know, you get, I mean, as a mother, right? That feminine side of us, and we all possess, male and female, masculine, feminine energies, right? Mm-hmm. And we protect. We protect our children. Sometimes we just keep stuffing it because when we see what's happening, when a woman comes out and shares her story, you've seen the Facebook post, you've seen the commentary on media, you're smeared. I mean, you were victimized, and to have the courage to speak, I think people see it as an isolated incident. Oh, he, grabbed her or this. There are so many different experiences around abuse.
There's a scale too.
There's a scale, and it's traumatizing. And so a lot of people are being triggered. And when they see these messages of minimizing, invalidating, smearing the person, pulling everything from their background up to basically say that didn't happen, or she's lying, or to basically shove it under the rug, right?
Discredit her like what
Discredit her.
Harvey is hiring a Mossad agent
Right.
to dig dirt about the accusers.
Right, and that's what happens. So women go through the anxiety and that trepidation of knowing, oh my goodness, this is going to happen, right? And it's re-traumatizing because we don't have a society yet where there is that support, right? And that is like, we're still desensitized to the severity of these kind of abuses and how patriarchy impacts women and men too. Mm-hmm. And so
mostly women.
Right, so they don't see the impacts and the trauma that these women that are coming out and speaking out go through just to get the courage. They don't see that they're taking into account how it's going to impact their children, if they have children, their partners, their mothers, their family.
Career.
And that is a lot after they've already dealt with some kind of form of abuse. And then after that, they then have to respond to the spin, the minimizing, the invalidating. And they're not on trial, but they're somehow put on trial. And so when you think about, like, for somebody to say, oh, they're just coming out because of this, it takes a lot of courage to come out. And I think, again, we don't see the before, the after, the trepidation, what they go through just to have that courage to step out.
It's almost like the abuse never ceased. Even if she comes out, still the reaction will be another abuse. So
yes, re-traumatizing.
You relive the abuse again.
Right, and what that does to a body. I think we really need to really begin to understand trauma and how, we carry trauma from racism. We carry trauma from this. I mean, when you've dealt with any kind of like abuse, you deal with trauma in your body. And so I think that when people are posting these messages or saying these things or minimizing, you are triggering a traumatic reaction in that person. And how is that respecting somebody's humanity? It's not.
For the people who are out there, I think a lot of women out there that are not celebrity, that are not abused by a powerful celebrity or a politician, but they abused at work or wherever, a relationship. What do you tell those people with the Me Too movement now empowering a lot of people to come out, but we need to go to the next macro. in the culture itself,
Right.
and the people who are still afraid to come up with their story. We need to have a mechanism or space for them
Right.
to be secure to tell their story.
Right. I think when you look at, like I was reading an article of a lot of women of color working in fast food, working in retail, and other spaces, that this kind of abuse happens all the time, right? Again, disproportionately impacting a lot of women of color. But again, I mean, it happens in people's homes with their partners. And again, there's the power dynamic, and it plays out differently for different people. If you're working somewhere, there's that power dynamic with maybe that person is your boss, right? Or your supervisor. If it's, in the home, there's the power dynamic of, again, women wanting to keep their families together, or there could be financial, issues. And again, depending on the situation, speaking out can have deep impacts, for a person. I mean, there's so much shame associated with this kind of behavior.
Even now.
Yes, and that shame, again, it shows, the trauma, to be isolated again. And so a lot of times it's like, well, I'm not going to speak out because I know I'm going to be shamed, minimized, invalidated, and isolated from my community. And I think, again, looking at the power dynamics is important. Example, a lot of the politicians that we see, think about the power dynamics with elected officials. They have a built-in staff that's paid to protect them. And it's like this, when I think of politics, it's like this matrix. And we just are plugged in, regardless if you're, right, left, and there's just a structure and a way that we always just do things habitually and without putting much deep thought into it. And we relinquish a lot of our personal power. So you may have, a staffer. Their job with that power is to protect their boss, the elected official. So habitually, without even thinking, you're just, and it's so fast paced, you're just kind of like programmed to just like, oh, this is going to hurt. We got to find a spin, or we got to find a way to discredit this person, right? And their jobs rely on it too, right? And so we have this structure, and it shows up in our families, in our communities, in faith base, in politics, in like every system where there's this power dynamic, and it creates fear, right? And so oftentimes, again, the cultural hypnosis, we just kind of like perpetuate that problem without really deeply thinking about it.
Normalize it too. I mean,
And it's normalized, and it's considered.
Some people will say much of this problem comes because we don't have enough women in power position in business or in politics, and now we have a president that brags about grabbing the private women parts, and we still a lot of women voted for him. So there is also a complaint to go to for some of those women. But you have a Michigan candidate. She's running, I think, for general attorney, and she has a campaign, an ad campaign. She said to kind of avoid the sexual harassment and avoid what Charlie Rose done for his staff. Rubbing half naked in the living room. She said, you should, I'm going to say this, I don't know if we should vote for someone who doesn't have a penis, he doesn't have whatever. And is that good part of the, you're talking about a macro structure solution that we need to bring more women in power?
Well, I, respect her, opinion and, to feel that way. For me, I do think we need more women in power. But again, patriarchy impacts, I have two boys, 2 sons. And me being here is for them. And I have a granddaughter. And I have watched especially of late, as I'm unpacking how patriarchy has impacted me, and I have to credit a lot of young women of color have had conversations with me about how it's showing up in different organizations that they're working at, and I realize I'm numb to it. You know, a lot of it. I just don't see it. I'm 43 and they're in their 20s, and so I've lived a lot of life where I'm culturally hypnotized as well. And I'm starting to look back at, kind of like I did with racism, when I started learning more and unpacking that. Yeah. That's how it impacted me when I was young. That's why I felt this way about myself. There's a lot of similarities in some of the narratives and the minimizing that you see around when, racism and patriarchy, right? Mm-hmm. And, a young lady, Sharanthi Gunathilaka, Janice Watts, and several other young women were coming to me, talking to me about their experience, and they taught me so much. They taught me so much about what I had been blinded to in society and participated in because I just was not aware. And that saying, when you know better, you do better. And I think that if justice is not something like out there. It's something we embody, right? We embody justice. We embody our values. And they manifest in how we create our life, in our families, in our different systems, in our government. And if you are truly committed to justice, not committed to a political party, not committed to a candidate, not committed to the external, but if you're committed to embodying justice, and to me, justice is about love for all humanity. It's about holding up a mirror for even those who have oppressed to be able to see how their own humanity is impacted and they are better to rise as well. It's about compassion, it's about grace, but it's also about fierce love. And
love in a more complex.
And holding that fierce love, like you can do better. You can do better. And I just want to say, I think that we really need to unpack that. Like, if you're committed to justice, then you're constantly doing self-examination. And we all have perpetuated injustice. We all have perpetuated patriarchy. We all have perpetuated...
That's a very important point, but because you see the people reaction to a politician that is in their own party. If they like that politician, they find excuses for them, like Al Franken, he's a nice guy, he's funny, he didn't mean that. But if somebody like Moore, he's got a pedophile, and vice versa. And so as you say, if somebody is committed to justice, we will not have that kind of tribal. We have tribalism now. Yes. How we addressing all this. Everybody is defending their tribal leader, regardless of what the work, what crime or what the behavior is. And this is very courageous of you to come and share this with a lot of people out there. That they need to come and talk about their story and the story that is not really sexy enough, is not celebratory enough, is not glamorous enough, for someone like a powerful man in politics or in the media or in movies. But people in the average and in a very mundane situation that are also been abused at work, at a family. But thank you so much for coming in and sharing this with us. We wish you well. It's always open for you to come back. Here is Karen Monahan, is a Me Too advocate, coming to really be positive about this and talking about this issue in a more positive way and sharing her experience to empower other women and finding a solution, finding a mechanism for healing. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week. Assalamu alaikum and God bless you all.